Almighty God, touch and anoint my lips of clay, that my words may not just be my words, that we all may be touched by your Holy Spirit. I'd like to start about something which came up in the earlier reading when we were talking about the voice of the Almighty. The beautiful voice of the Almighty that made Sirion skip like a calf, that scattered the cedars of Lebanon, that made the mountains leap. Sometimes when we read the New Testament, we come across the concept of Jesus as the Logos, the Word, and to us it's deeply confusing, but in the philosophical tradition that the Gospel writers were heir to, a word wasn't just an article of language. The word of a thing or a person was the body of works, the body of actions, the belief, the intent, the vital creative force spoken into being. Words were always believed to have power. Of course they do have power. But we can be far too material in the way we understand these things, but actually all the things which have shaped our psyche have come to us from other people, primarily through words spoken, either by our parents when we were very tiny, by our teachers, by those that inspired us, those that loved us. So the word is a mighty and powerful thing and is not just an article of language. In the concept of the Word of God, we're talking about a creative act. We're talking about the act of creation, the word spoken forth. It's a philosophical idea which we're not generally familiar with, but it's important that we understand that it is the bedrock of the understanding of the world that our ancestors had, and our ancestors in the faith when they came to write down the Jesus tradition in the various Gospels. Now I'm going to talk about that vexed issue of baptism. And I'm going to talk about it not separated from its background and only talk about Christian baptism. I'm going to talk about what is baptism representative of and how deep does its roots go in human history and in human imagination and spirituality. Well, the answer is very deep indeed. Baptism harkens back to the ideas that we see in Genesis of the chaos monsters, of water associated with chaos and darkness, of associated with the beasts that dwell in the deep, an association with the underworld. And passing through water is a little death. It is a profound act of rebirth. And coming up out of the water is claiming a new life. And it is claiming a new life in a very real way. We can say, oh, well, that's not really a new life. That's just psychological. But anything that acts is actual. Anything that has an effect is real. What we see around us are only impressions on our psyche. We see colours and we have faith that other people see something similar. We have no idea what our brothers and sisters are actually seeing. It's all in the psyche. But it acts upon us, therefore it is actual. The same happens for this rebirth that occurs in baptism. And we find it in stories and mythologies going back thousands and thousands of years. We think about, in the Greek myths, Theseus descends to the underworld as a rite of passage in order to claim a bride, Persephone. And on the way, he's exhausted and he sits down on a stone seat. And because he sits down and he tarries, he becomes part of that underworld. He becomes part of death and discovers that he has grown into the stone and can no longer move. This passage through the underworld is not something to be taken lightly, and nor is baptism. What it is an attempt to make whole the divided person. Because very frequently in many spiritual traditions, and especially in modern Christianity, we are told to avoid the darkness at all costs, and to try and cut it out from our own soul and psyche, when really that is an act of mutilation. It's also a lie. It's religion trying to crack on to you that everything will be sunny and joyful if you only take the Christianity pill. Well, that's a lie. And it won't take you long to work out that it's a wicked lie. And then you'll start to think that you're failed Christians because you haven't suddenly become Stepford wives with fixed evangelical rings. So you think, well, I'm a miserable Christian, it's appalling. What can I do? Well, you have to, for a start, recognize that objects are only made whole by their shadows. You can only tell that something's solid because it's got a shadow. Human beings are only three-dimensional, real creatures because we have a shadow to delineate the light. It's not just about balance, it's just how it is. You know, Carl Jung, the wonderful spiritually minded psychologist of the middle of the last century, believed that the psyche and the soul were exactly like the body and that they were kept in equilibrium. So whenever anything became too far in one direction, there's always a system to bring it back into equilibrium. It's the same with our bodies. I mean, we keep at a constant temperature because of these complex systems to keep us in equilibrium. Now, he also believed that when the human soul suppresses deeply something, then paradoxically that something gains much greater power over us. We don't reconcile it, we try and pretend it doesn't exist. Well, it does. It acts upon us, therefore it is actual, it's real. We can't tell ourselves, we can tell ourselves, but it won't have any effect, that just because something occurs in our interior life, it's not real. It is real. It's what shapes us and motivates us. It's what makes us go out in the morning. It's what makes us come to church. It's what makes us love other people or hate other people. It's what makes us joyful or sorrowful. It's real. And therefore we have to pay it the due respect that we do to our bodies. We have to work on reconciliation. We have to work on becoming fully whole persons and not just believing that the Christian project is about cutting out anything we find uncomfortable. That won't work. God knows, modern Christianity is a testament to the fact that it doesn't damn well work. And unless something is truthful on a very deep level, we might as well not do it. And baptism is one of those rites of passage that works. We don't know why, and we don't know how, but it speaks to something very deep, that immersion in the waters of chaos, that bringing out into a new life. Now, cultures across the world do something very similar. The prehistoric peoples in Cornwall and Germany had these standing stones with holes in them. And in times of sickness, or in times of despair, when somebody needed a new revival of their life force, they would be passed through this hole amidst much ceremony. And they would experience themselves being born again, and their community would support this idea of being born again. And we have every reason to believe that they felt they were born again, that it acted upon them, that it was actual, therefore it was real. Because the fact is, these stones were there for thousands of years. To paraphrase Deacon Jim, if it wasn't useful to them, they wouldn't do it. Christians have been being baptized for 2,000 years now. It worries me that baptism has tailed off as it becomes less and less a rite of passage and more, oh, it's a box you take, you know, with small children. It's just something you do, you know. There's no sense of delving down into the underworld and being redeemed into the light and new life. Most of the time there's kind of like, there's a dribble of water and, you know, some things you're not quite clear on, and the community is not ritualizing this experience to make it powerful and profound. So, you might have lots of theological ideas which are very useful intellectually, you know, about what baptism does and how it gets rid of sin. Well, if sin is brokenness, then yes, it's reconciling you into a whole person. That's exactly what it does. So why did Jesus feel it? Well, because for Jesus to be a fully three-dimensional human being, he had to also have both sides of himself. He had to have the side which basked in pellucid light and the side which had darkness. And we can't only have an idea that sin is just when people do things that are uncomfortable to us. Because Jesus did uncomfortable things. Jesus did things which were socially awkward and difficult, and when we read them now, we have to do a lot of tap dancing to try and make ourselves believe that they don't fit into what we think of as sin. Because too often what we think of sin is just a social faux pas, you know? When you do something that's disapproved of. And therefore somebody being sinless is just a very nice person, you know? Phooey! Nonsense! Cobblers! Because if that's our belief, then everyone is just, I mean, you're lost. You might as well give up now. Me too, you know? No. Jesus got angry. Jesus had darkness as well as light. He had depths as well as heights. Jesus saw death and despair. Jesus was not living in some cloud cuckoo land out of the pages of the Watchtower. Jesus was not a very brightly coloured watercolour picking tomatoes and grinning at his neighbour. Sorry, that's a particular image from the Watchtower that sticks in my mind from being a child, you know? Jesus was a fully human being, and the model for fully human beings, and therefore for us to be fully human beings, we have to contemplate that our lives are probably going to involve all manner of darknesses as well as all manner of lights, and we are not going to be happy with our interior lives half the time. We are going to feel ourselves everything from evil, wicked, to transcendent. Now, Christianity teaches, in the parable of the sheep and the goats, that even as you do unto these the least of my children, you must do unto me. But too often, when we really do become self-aware, we realize that the least of these, my brothers and sisters, is probably ourselves. Then the teaching changes. It is no longer a teaching of compassion and love and healing and restitution. It is you beat the thing continually in the hope that it will eventually die and shrivel. But instead, what we have to do is show loving kindness and compassion to the least of these, my children, even when that turns out to be us. Because if we look deep within ourselves and find parts of ourselves so dark, so troublesome and so upsetting that we can only feel hatred to them, then it is that we must apply that sublime and ultimate Christian teaching that we love those who hate us, we love those who are unlovely, we love those who are evil. And if that's ourselves, so be it. And baptism is this supreme reconciliation of all things. It is the descent into the waters of chaos that we may make our peace with those waters of chaos and not see them as other, not other than God. There is nothing that is other than God. And Christ's descent into those waters of chaos foreshadowed Christ's metaphorical descent into the underworld after his crucifixion. And in the East, what do we see about that image of Christ's descent into the underworld? What does he do? Well, it's called the harrowing of hell. We have this image where he descends into the underworld and he takes humanity by the wrist, symbolized by the symbolic man and woman, Adam and Eve, and he lifts them up out of the darkness into the light. And this, on a different level, is what occurs in baptism, and what occurs in that rite of passage, and what occurred in Jesus' baptism. It was a claiming of the whole person. And it was then that he came and flowered and began his ministry. And it was John the Baptist who in many ways represents the darkness of the duad of Jesus and John the Baptist, who was responsible for this rebirth. So there's nothing inside of us that we must despise because we are called upon to have charitable loving kindness to all people and all things, including ourselves. But we may look towards a self-awareness and a reconciliation which other faith traditions call enlightenment. We may call it wholeness, becoming fully human, and in becoming fully human, becoming fully God's will for humanity. In Jesus' name.